I stumbled across Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson, the same way people stumble across cults, conspiracies, and cocaine habits, by accident and then compulsively, obsessively, like it was a message encoded specifically for my system. It happened while cross-referencing fringe neuroscience texts, underground culture manifestos, and some ancient hippie forum where every comment was in all caps and posted at 3 a.m. by someone with 3 usernames and a digital identity crisis. The name popped up, Wilson. The book, Prometheus Rising. The subtitle might as well have been, "Read this if you want to reprogram your nervous system," which of course I do. Wilson isn't just writing, he's wiring bombs under your brain's security system. The book is a bootleg manual for rewiring your consciousness. It's a fuse you light and then hope you survive the detonation. And what detonates first is the model he opens with, the thinker and the prover. The thinker is the part of your brain that generates beliefs. It's the novelist, the mythmaker, the inventor. The part of you that says the world is flat, or I am ugly, or God wants me to kill those people. The prover is the silent accountant. It takes what the thinker believes and goes out into the world to collect evidence. You think all men are pigs? Allow me to show you every rude man within a 500-mile radius. You think you're unlovable? Here's a catalog of rejections you didn't even notice when you were confident. The thinker believes. The prover proves. That's the loop. And what you think is truth is just what you've been proving to yourself on repeat since puberty, or preschool, or possibly since your grandfather's war trauma got embedded in your epigenetics. The mistake isn't that you believe things. The mistake is that you don't realize you're the one writing the script, and the prover is just your overpaid hype man. Wilson kicks this off with the turtles all the way down anecdote. Some old woman tells William James that the earth sits on the back of a turtle, and that turtle sits on another turtle, and so on forever. We laugh because it sounds stupid. But it's no more stupid than thinking the universe came from nothing, exploded, cooled, and started a stock market. The turtle lady's thinker has built her prover a universe. So has yours. So has mine. So has every ideologue, influencer, ayahuasca shaman, and economics professor on the planet. The point isn't who's right. The point is, we're all standing on turtles, and every last one of them is hallucinated, even the ones that can do calculus. Here's where it gets personal. Every belief you hold is a little parasite that distorts your perception. Wilson lays it out like a psychological autopsy. If you believe Jews control the world, you'll find proof. If you believe men are inherently evil, you'll find proof. If you believe the sun rotates around the earth, you'll find proof. This isn't philosophy. It's neuroplasticity. The thinker-prover loop isn't a theory. It's a machine you're trapped in, and it's so good at confirming itself that it makes you think your beliefs are reality. But they're not. They're symptoms. Your political opinions, your theological convictions, your sexual morality, your self-worth, they're all artifacts of this loop. Not one of them is yours until you tear them apart, light them on fire, and build something new from the ash. The lie of objectivity has a nice long beard and wears a white lab coat. Wilson takes a brutal swipe at the myth of the rational scientist. Not because science is bad, but because scientists are just people with clipboards and egos. Galileo was rejected by his scientific peers as well as the church. Einstein was mocked before he was worshipped. Even Einstein couldn't let go of his bias long enough to accept quantum mechanics. If you're thinking, well, I'm not like that, congratulations. That's your thinker talking. The prover will make sure you find ways to stay blind to your own biases. Scientists are only scientific when they stick to method. The rest of the time, they're meatbags with insecurities and tribal loyalty to their academic departments. That goes for you too, Professor. Let's rip the veil off. You're doing this right now. Whatever you believe about yourself, you're proving it. If you believe you're special, you see signs from the universe. If you believe you're broken, you notice every moment that confirms it. That's the punchline. It's not just that this model explains weirdos and zealots. It explains you. You are in a trance. Wilson doesn't say this to mock you, he says it to dare you. Dare you to notice the moment your thinker chooses a belief. Dare you to catch your prover in the act of laying bricks to reinforce a wall that's keeping you in a prison you built and now call your personality. This is why you're stuck. You're not broken, you're just miswired. You picked up beliefs about yourself when you were 7 or 17, and now you're still wearing them like a badge or a scar. You think it's who you are, but it's just a file saved in your nervous system. A file that gets opened every time you say, I can't, I always, or that's just me. The prover isn't cruel, it's loyal. It's just doing its job. But your job, if you want to be anything more than a conditioned mammal, is to become your own hacker. This chapter is your manual. Wilson isn't writing, he's handing you dynamite and pointing at the door. And here's the scariest part. Society is one big thinker-prover machine. Whole civilizations are hallucinated into being. America is a thinker-prover feedback loop, scaled to 330 million people. So is Christianity, so is Marxism, so is capitalism, so is your job, so is your bank account. They are all pretend. They are all real. That paradox is the essence of your imprisonment. You're living in a world made of language and consensus spells, and your prover is still insisting it's all solid. But it's vapor, beautiful, dangerous vapor. Wilson laughs because the joke is enormous, and you're standing in the middle of it with your pants down, yelling about facts. So what now? You rewire, that's the only way out. Wilson includes a set of exercises because this isn't a concept to understand. It's a weapon to wield. Visualize a coin and go look for it. Tell yourself you're hideous and go to a party. Tell yourself you're radiant and go to the same party. Watch what changes. Run the experiment. The goal isn't to believe anything. The goal is to stop believing by accident. You've been trained to think your thinker is truth and your prover is reality. But it's all optional. It's all plastic. You are not your thoughts. You are not your evidence. You are the magician deciding what spell to cast next. The brain is not a computer, and yet it is. Not in the silicon and solder sense, but as a metaphor, a working model, a dangerously useful lie. That's how Wilson frames it, and that's the first reorientation we need before proceeding any further into this nervous jungle. Forget your philosophy degree, throw your ontological compass in the river. We're talking about usefulness here, not truth. If you try to define what the brain is, you're already shackled to the Aristotelian prison of is. The world is not made of is, it's made of as if. The brain functions as if it were a computer. It has input, output, feedback, memory, and it can be programmed. That's what matters. It takes in data from the world, interprets it through filters, language, culture, trauma, ideology, and then spits out a worldview. That worldview, for you, is reality. Except it's not. It's a VR headset you forgot you were wearing. A map mistaken for territory. A hallucination with user settings. Now imagine that this programmable system, the thing that decides whether you cry at sunsets or flinch at intimacy, is not built from steel or fiber optics, but from colloids suspended in electrochemical goo. The brain is not a static machine. It's a wet, shimmering field of probability states, balanced between sol and gel. These are not metaphors Wilson invented. They're language borrowed from real biochemistry. Sol means loose and liquid. Gel means stuck and solid. The brain constantly moves between these two poles. Potatoes, stress, trauma, orgasms, LSD, poetry, television, all of these shift the balance. A speech can harden it, a kiss can soften it. The brain isn't a dry computer, it's a storm, a gelatinous electrical jungle that metabolizes everything it encounters and wires it into the very shape of awareness. What you feel as I is just a current configuration of that weather system. Add a new input, chemical, symbolic, emotional, and the storm changes course. You are always tripping. That's the line that pulls the floorboards out from under the house of logic. All experience is psychedelic, Wilson says. Not just the freaked out guy at Burning Man with glitter on his eyebrows, not just the shaman with a mouthful of vines. You. Right now. If you've ever wondered why people can live in radically different realities, flat earthers, climate deniers, Calvinists, vegans, economists, it's because we're all under the influence. All the time. Everything we perceive has already been filtered, colored, adjusted, and finalized by a set of neuro-linguistic processes that are both invisible and automatic. Psychedelics just show you what your brain does every day. The only difference is that on LSD, the controls are visible. Without it, the whole machine is hidden behind a wall of assumptions that you mistake for the world. The distinction between hardware and software isn't philosophical, it's operational. The hardware is your wetware, the meat, the neurons, the blood-fed processor. It can be damaged, starved, or burned, but what makes you you is not in the hardware, it's in the code. Every belief, habit, trauma, phobia, fetish, loyalty, and reaction is a software script running inside the machine. And here's the trick, it all feels like hardware. You say, I'm shy, or I'm a jealous person, or I'm no good with numbers, and it feels like a fact. But it's not. It's a line of code that got installed somewhere between first grade and your last bad relationship. Most people spend their lives patching the software with alcohol, therapy, or self-help books, but the truth Wilson offers is more radical. You can delete it. You can debug the whole fucking system. Four types of software define your identity. First, the genetic imperatives, your hardwired instincts. No choice there. You're stuck with the lizard code. Then comes imprinting. These are one-shot, high-intensity experiences that carve permanent channels in your brain. A dog bite, your first orgasm, the day you learned death was real. These don't just change your mood, they define your future triggers. Conditioning is slower, more Pavlovian. Reward and punishment, repetition and ritual. Most of school, most of religion, most of office culture runs on this. Finally, there's learning, the softest and most flexible code. This is where you adapt, evolve, change shape. Learning is the door out of the maze. But you can't get there until you recognize that most of your behavior isn't learning at all. It's imprint and conditioning wearing a clever disguise. Now the city appears, the total environment of overlapping reality tunnels. What Wilson calls a reality tunnel is just a user interface for navigating the world. It's the collection of scripts you're running that determine what you notice, how you interpret it, and what meaning you assign. One man sees a street protest and thinks democracy. Another sees chaos. Same photons hitting the retina, different tunnels. And these tunnels are not private delusions. They're shared illusions. Languages, economies, religions, national identities, all collective software environments. You don't have beliefs, you have a UI. You don't live in the world, you live in an interface layered over the world, customized by your cultural onboarding, trauma history, and cognitive habits. There is no objective perception. There is only tunnel vision pretending to be normal. There's a moment, if you've been paying attention, when this all flips from theory to confrontation. It's the moment you realize there is no grown-up, no central authority, no administrator behind the curtain. It's just you and your code. That can be terrifying, but it's also your liberation notice. Because once you see it, you can start rewriting. That voice in your head that says you're not creative, that's a script. The shame you feel about desire, that's a script. The anxiety around success, the chronic self-sabotage, the feeling of being an imposter, the hatred of your own body. Scripts, scripts, scripts. And once you realize they're scripts, you can learn to code. You can start feeding the hardware new instructions. This is not metaphor. This is what the brain actually does. It runs whatever code you give it until you forget you were the one who gave it. The choice is no longer whether you were programmed. The choice is whether you will take back the editor's seat. The moment a newborn exits the womb, the first circuit of the nervous system boots up like a prehistoric operating system written in 2 commands, yes and no, safe or unsafe. The entire existential logic of that tiny organism is wired around these signals. Is there warmth? Is there milk? Is the environment calm or chaotic? This first switch, once flipped, sets the emotional tone for a lifetime. If it registers safety, the rest of the system can evolve. If it registers danger, the machine adapts not by thriving, but by preparing for war. This is not metaphor, it's neurology. And it begins not with thought, but with flesh pressed against flesh, heartbeat against heartbeat, breast in mouth. No ideas yet, just the mammalian calculus of survival. There's no going back to change it. That's the cruelty. The imprint on this first circuit happens once, early, and with finality. It's not taught. It's not remembered. It's branded into the nervous system like a cattle mark. If the infant finds warmth, consistency, and bodily reassurance, the imprint registers the universe as friendly. If not, if the signals are intermittent, absent, or violent, then the imprint registers the universe as hostile, unpredictable, or absent altogether. This isn't about parenting styles or moral judgments. It's about timing. The nervous system is open for programming, and then it closes like a trapdoor. After that, all future experiences are filtered through that first binary. Was the first taste of the world soft and giving or cold and chaotic? You live your answer to that question every day. This isn't just about humans. It's the architecture of mammalian evolution. Rodents, felines, primates, all of them imprint this way. Nursing triggers chemical cascades of trust, oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine. It's not love, it's bonding, and it's biochemical. When Wilson talks about this circuit, he's placing human development in the continuum of nature's oldest strategies. The brain is built on layers. This is the first layer, the bedrock. Before language, before ego, before identity, there is the suckling mouth and the warm skin. A secure mammal becomes exploratory, curious, playful. An insecure one becomes rigid, fearful, obsessive. You can see it in puppies, you can see it in boardrooms. Evolution doesn't care whether you understand this. It only cares whether the loop completes. It doesn't matter how clever you are. If your first circuit is jammed, you'll be dragging that infant's terror through every chapter of your adult life. You'll build philosophies around it, disguise it as pragmatism, call it realism, maybe even write a best-selling book about boundaries and self-respect. But underneath all that noise, the signal is still the same: unsafe. That's the horror of this circuit. It masquerades. It doesn't announce itself. It whispers through habits and reactions. If you flinch from touch, if you can't relax without control, if affection feels like a setup for betrayal, odds are your first imprint was scrambled. You're not living a life, you're running a glitch. Wilson's insight turns cold and sharp when he links this to authoritarianism. People who had insecure first imprints crave strong external structures, not because they're stupid, because they're scared. A chaotic internal state seeks order outside. That's why dictators rise during economic crashes, why cults recruit so well in college dorms, why nationalism spikes after collective trauma. The insecure organism wants protection. It wants a parental figure. It wants to be told what to do. The paranoid circuitry, imprinted at the breast or the bottle, echoes outward into history and elects tyrants to soothe the infant inside the voter. Paranoia isn't a quirk or a philosophy. It's the logical result of an unsafe imprint. Wilson calls it the default mode of a twisted first circuit. You think the neighbors are spying. You interpret glances as threats. You see patterns where none exist. That's not insanity. That's a miswired safety switch. This helps explain not just individual mental illness, but entire cultural phenomena. Mass hysteria, witch hunts, QAnon, Puritanism, fascist purity campaigns. These are not just ideologies. They are biosurvival responses in cultural drag. A system that feels under siege will hallucinate enemies and then act accordingly. The mind builds conspiracy theories not to understand, but to justify its fear. What happens when you never got the breast but still crave its comfort? You find substitutes. Cigarettes, food, heroin, constant scrolling. Anything that engages the mouth and floods the brain with dopamine. That's the oral feedback loop, and it's not poetic, it's measurable. Addictions are survival rituals, pathetic and sacred at once. The addict is not weak-willed. The addict is self-medicating the unhealed wound of abandonment. The nervous system remembers, even when the mind forgets. Addiction is what happens when the first imprint fails and the organism keeps looking for the missing code. Can love fix it? Sometimes. Momentarily. Intimacy, real intimacy, not performative sex or codependent clinging, can stabilize the circuit. Touch and presence can create new associations, but they rarely overwrite the original code. You might feel safe in a partner's arms and still spiral the moment they leave the room. Therapy helps, meditation helps, but nothing works unless you address the original programming, and most people don't even know it exists. They treat symptoms, anxiety, insecurity, avoidance. They never realize the operating system is faulty because it was never designed, it was installed before language. Humans are biologically unfinished at birth. We're born early, soft, and stupid because evolution traded physical resilience for cerebral complexity. That means our brain keeps developing outside the womb, exposed to culture, language, and trauma. It also means we're programmable like no other species. Our neoteny, our retained infant traits, makes us adaptable. It also makes us vulnerable. That's why children believe in Santa, why teenagers join cults, and why adults can be hypnotized by slogans and marketing. Our prolonged helplessness makes us deeply social, but also easily hacked. That social brain begins its training on the first circuit. If the training is corrupted, the whole simulation jitters forever. Wilson offers a glimpse of hope. The first circuit can be reimprinted, but only under conditions of neurological vulnerability. Extreme fear, deep meditation, orgasmic surrender, psychedelic states, shock. These are moments when the nervous system opens again, becomes soft, editable. If done consciously, safely, and with intent, the old script can be overwritten. This is not spiritual mumbo-jumbo, it's neuroplasticity. But reprogramming this deep takes more than insight. It takes ritual, it takes discipline, it takes confronting the part of you that was terrified before you knew language and showing it something new. That's the real initiation. Not a costume, not a chant, just the willingness to meet your infant self at the root of your fear and tell it, we made it. We're still here. Let's try again. There comes a moment when the baby begins to move independently, crawls away from the warm safety of the breast, and starts laying psychic claim to objects, space, toys, and attention. This is when the second circuit of the nervous system lights up like a fuse. The oral biosurvival circuit simply asks, am I safe? This one asks, whose territory is this? It's about space, control, boundaries, assertion. Wilson calls it the anal emotional territorial circuit because it emerges around the same time as toilet training, but the real trigger is deeper. It's the formation of the self as a social organism negotiating space with others. From this point forward, life becomes a series of negotiations and challenges for dominance, recognition, and emotional turf. We call this developing personality, but it's mostly training a mammal to not bite when its toy is taken. Toilet training isn't just about hygiene. It's the first major confrontation between personal autonomy and societal expectation. The infant wants to shit whenever and wherever. The parent wants it done properly. Enter tension. Enter power dynamics. Enter shame. Whether the child submits or resists, that decision becomes encoded into the emotional wiring of the ego. If the child submits with pride and gets praised, they begin to associate obedience with love. If they resist and get punished, they may internalize rebellion, stubbornness, or guilt. Either way, the message is clear. Your body is not entirely yours. You must master it, regulate it, delay it. This tiny negotiation becomes a lifelong metaphor for how we handle all kinds of power: emotional expression, sexual desire, political loyalty. Control is the name of the game, and the game starts on the toilet. Long before Freud or Wilson came along, evolution had already sorted out how mammals handle space and power. Packs, prides, tribes, they all operate on dominance hierarchies. The second circuit is nature's way of avoiding constant physical conflict. Instead of endless violence, mammals use posture, gesture, tone, and display to communicate who's in charge. We call this social interaction, but it's just as much tail positions, eye contact, and muscle tension as it is language. In fact, most of it bypasses language entirely. You know who intimidates you. You know who triggers you. The nervous system calculates these rankings automatically, a holdover from primate politics. When someone rubs you the wrong way, that's your second circuit barking. Think back to the first time you won a fight, or lost one, or got humiliated in front of others. Those moments imprint deeply into this circuit. The results aren't just memories, they're scripts. Win a few battles early and you might become a bully. Lose them and you might turn into a sycophant or a comedian. Most egos are just survival strategies developed in schoolyards. The jock, the nerd, the rebel, the ghost, they're all roles learned during early socialization, based on how territory and pride were negotiated. Wilson's genius is in showing how these scripts rarely get updated. We carry them into adulthood, into marriages, into boardrooms. A middle manager shouting at interns is often just a child trying to reclaim a stolen toy. Authority doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. For some, it's comfort. For others, it's a threat. That division starts with the second circuit. If your early experiences linked authority to protection, then you're likely to trust institutions, obey laws, and follow orders. If authority meant punishment, control, or humiliation, then you'll either rebel against it or submit while resenting every second. These aren't ideologies, they're nervous system programs. They decide whether you become a cop, an anarchist, a priest, or a bureaucrat. And they have nothing to do with rationality. Your political opinions may just be your toddler self reacting to the tone your dad used when you spilled juice. The ego is not your higher self. It's a watchdog. Its job is to defend territory and signal threat. Wilson likens it to a dog. It barks, it postures, it seeks approval. And like a dog, it can be trained, abused, rewarded, or broken. The problem is that most people don't realize the ego is a dog. They think it's the master, so they follow it. They let it drag them into arguments, wars, rivalries, shame spirals, and delusions of grandeur. The dog wants status, attention, safety. Feed it praise and it'll spin in circles. Hurt it and it'll sulk or bite. Meditation, therapy, psychedelics, they all start to work when you finally see the dog for what it is and stop mistaking its bark for your conscience. National politics is Second Circuit behavior in full regalia. Two toddlers fighting over a toy, but now the toy is oil fields, voter blocks, or ideological purity. Watch a presidential debate and ignore the words. Just observe the posturing. Raised voices, interruptions, smirks, dominance gestures. Wilson calls war toilet training with guns. It's not a joke, it's a neural fact. Most geopolitical decisions are Second Circuit squabbles dressed up in Third Circuit rhetoric. But the circuitry underneath is primitive and reptilian. That's why rational arguments never work against nationalist fervor. You're trying to reason with a watchdog that's growling because it smells a rival's piss on the fence. Status addiction is the glue of modern society. Titles, brands, follower counts, uniforms, office locations, they're all signals in the status economy. Military salutes, academic regalia, business cards, even hashtags, they're ritual displays of submission or dominance. Most people don't seek freedom. They seek a place in the hierarchy that feels secure. Whether climbing the ladder or rejecting it outright, the Second Circuit is always humming underneath. People kneel not just for gods, but for jobs. They bow to influencers and CEOs the same way chimpanzees submit to silverbacks. The modern suit is just a stylized fur coat. Shame is the secret weapon of Second Circuit control. It bypasses logic and hooks directly into the nervous system. When you're shamed, you don't think, you flush, you contract, you lower your gaze. It's visceral. Families use it. Churches live on it. Schools refine it. The result is a population that polices itself more effectively than any dictatorship could. You obey not because you're afraid of punishment, but because you're afraid of being looked at the wrong way. Wilson shows how shame locks the ego in a posture of defensive obedience. But once you see it, once you recognize shame as a reflex instead of a truth, it starts to lose its grip. Rebels are not always free. Most are just running a reverse version of the same imprint. If you were punished for asserting yourself, you might react by rejecting all authority. But that's not freedom. It's a reflex. You're still trapped. You still define yourself by the power structure. Wilson warns against confusing rebellion with liberation. The rebel still worships the king, just in reverse. True autonomy comes when the Second Circuit is witnessed, not obeyed or denied. When you can step outside the game entirely and stop reacting to ghosts of old alpha figures. Watch yourself the next time you're in a conflict. Notice what's actually happening. Not the words, not the ideas. Feel the contraction, the spike of heat in your chest. That's the watchdog. You're not debating a topic, you're defending territory. Online arguments, family feuds, passive-aggressive emails, these are all ritual barks in the Second Circuit language. Understanding this doesn't mean you stop arguing. It means you stop being hypnotized by the performance. You begin to recognize when your dog is barking at shadows, and you can choose, maybe for the first time, not to bite. Wilson doesn't leave us in the dirt. He offers exit routes, ritual humiliation, parody, awareness training. These rewire the circuit by undercutting its seriousness. Satire kills the guard dog's illusion of control. Laughter rewrites the imprint. Exercises like standing on your head in public or praising people you hate confuse the ego enough to loosen its grip. The watchdog isn't evil. It just needs better commands. And once you stop feeding it fear, it stops biting every stranger that walks by your soul. Charles Dickens and James Joyce are not just literary figures in Wilson's framework. They're full-scale neurological metaphors. They represent not schools of writing, but operating systems. Dickens writes from a nervous system that imprinted safety, motherliness, and moral optimism. Joyce writes from a nervous system molded by status conflict, wordplay dominance, and ontological rebellion. When Wilson pairs them, it's not about comparing styles. It's about using them as diagnostic tools. They are lenses to view the world. Each embodies a mode of perception tied to the earliest neural software installed in the mammalian brain. Reading them is like switching circuits in real time. Dickens speaks the language of the First Circuit. His stories revolve around hunger, injustice, and redemption, not because he moralizes, but because his nervous system felt the world as improvable if only people would soften. His villains are often cruel because they have forgotten tenderness. His heroes, often children or fools, survive not by dominating, but by outlasting cruelty with decency. That's the First Circuit in action. A worldview that assumes safety is possible, that kindness is the most advanced technology. Oliver Twist is not fighting for territory. He is searching for the warmth of the breast, the return to safety. Dickens doesn't write stories, he writes rescue missions. Joyce, on the other hand, enters the scene wielding the full weaponry of the Second Circuit. Every sentence a territory staked, every paragraph a turf war. He doesn't just challenge authority, he dismembers it, syllable by syllable. Ulysses is a rebellion disguised as a narrative. Finnegan's Wake isn't meant to be read. It's meant to dominate the reader, to push them into submission or force them to rise in kind. Joyce's language snarls and winks. He doesn't want your sympathy. He wants your struggle. In Wilson's map, this is the emotional territorial ego in literary form, proud, layered, ironic, unyielding. Joyce doesn't feed you, he dares you. The metaphor deepens when you map these writers onto social classes. Dickens was obsessed with the poor, not in a pitying sense, but as raw nerves exposed to a hostile world. The characters are always hungry, displaced, abandoned. First Circuit panic. Joyce, by contrast, emerges from the Irish middle-class Catholic world. Precise status hierarchies, ritual obedience, the ceaseless struggle to assert one's will inside tight social machinery. Second Circuit all the way. Wilson shows how these circuits stratify society. The underclass lives in a continuous survival crisis. The middle class orbits around pride, shame, promotion, and rebellion. The ruling class speaks the language of circuit manipulation fluently and doesn't bother explaining it. Dickens wraps language around the reader like a blanket. His prose is designed to soothe, to connect, to remind the reader that goodness might yet prevail. Joyce breaks language open. He pours acid over grammar and lets it reform into chaotic beauty. To read Dickens is to re-enter the breast. To read Joyce is to wrestle the father. These are not just styles, they are psychological landscapes. In one, language is nourishment. In the other, it is territory. If you find one easier than the other, you're not revealing a taste. You're revealing your imprint. The trick, Wilson suggests, is not to choose between them, but to observe yourself choosing. If you recoil from Joyce, ask what in you fears his chaos. If Dickens bores you, ask what in you resents being comforted. The nervous system reacts before the intellect arrives. The page is a mirror. Dickens and Joyce aren't just authors, they are reflections of your operating system under stress. Wilson's challenge is deceptively simple. Don't read to agree or disagree. Read to locate your own triggers. The book is a test. You are the subject. Literature becomes neurology, and the story you're really reading is the one your body is telling while your eyes move across the page. The moment a human starts using symbols consciously, something wild happens. The nervous system lights up a new circuit that no other species on Earth seems to have. The third circuit isn't about survival or emotion, it's about abstraction. Symbols, names, syntax. Once the brain begins assigning sounds or squiggles to objects, gestures to actions, narratives to memory, the entire nervous system bends into a new shape. This is the moment where a child stops just experiencing the world and begins modeling it. Language doesn't describe reality. It slices it, arranges it, and repackages it. The nervous system now sees the world not just through eyes and ears, but through categories. And those categories are not reality. They're hallucinations agreed upon for the sake of convenience. Alfred Korzybski, the eccentric general semanticist Wilson bows to like a holy prankster, coined the term time-binding to describe exactly what this symbolic capacity enables. Animals live in the present. Humans don't. The moment we started stringing sounds into meaning, we created memory. Not just personal memory, but cultural memory. With language, you could tell your kids about the tiger you saw last week. You could warn them about poison. You could pass on rituals, recipes, myths, grievances, blueprints. Civilization is time-binding. It's the ability to encode experience into language and hurl it across generations. Without this, history wouldn't exist. But once this circuit switches on, it doesn't turn off. It begins curating every future moment in terms of past language. You're no longer in time, you're in narrative. Korzybski's warning was simple, brilliant, and almost totally ignored. The map is not the territory. This one sentence could deprogram half of Western civilization. The word tree is not a tree. The word freedom is not freedom. When we forget this, we fall into neurolinguistic psychosis. And yet that forgetting is epidemic. Humans slaughter each other over words, then call it justice. We argue about concepts without ever touching the ground those concepts allegedly refer to. Your nervous system reacts to the symbol as if it were the thing itself. So you're not reacting to people, you're reacting to your map of them. That's not just a metaphor. It's how your third circuit processes the world. Reality becomes a set of symbolic proxies, and the proxies argue with each other. This is the trapdoor inside the third circuit. Language liberates, but it also enslaves. Because once you name something, you fix it in your perception. You reduce the infinite to the describable. Wilson points out how people become trapped in their own definitions. Someone says, "I'm a socialist," or "I believe in God," and what they mean is, "I now belong to a mental software package that will interpret all future data according to its definitions." Concepts become cages. Words like good, evil, normal, progress, these aren't tools, they're triggers. They pretend to mean something fixed, but in practice they short-circuit curiosity. The symbol replaces the sensation. You become loyal to the label, not the lived experience. And from this symbolic rigidity, bureaucracies bloom. Entire systems of power, legal, corporate, academic, are constructed not on people, but on definitions. The third circuit, once institutionalized, becomes a monster of abstraction. You can be denied medicine because a form was filled incorrectly. A judge can send you to prison because of a legal technicality. Language, once fluid and relational, is hardened into code. The bureaucratic mind no longer asks, "What happened?" It asks, "What does the protocol say?" This is what happens when the third circuit becomes unmoored from empathy and reality. It builds structures so complex they collapse under their own semantics. Wilson's antidote is elegant. Treat language like a tool, not a truth. Words are metaphors, approximations, guesses. They should be used flexibly, playfully. Once a word becomes sacred, it starts to rot. Scientific language works not because it's perfect, but because it remains open to revision. But in politics, religion, relationships, people cling to definitions as if their lives depended on it. They forget that all statements are provisional. When you say she is cold, you're not describing her. You're describing your nervous system's current symbolic map of her behavior. You're not in contact with the person. You're in contact with your own third circuit hallucination. And if you forget that, you suffer. Intellectuals often drown in the third circuit. They become fluent in concepts, fluent in arguments, fluent in critiques of critiques. But fluency is not freedom. It's just noise in high resolution. Wilson skewers the academic world for mistaking semantic complexity for insight. These are people who build skyscrapers of language with no ground floor. They cite sources, quote theories, perform verbal dances, but most of them can't tell you how their nervous system is reacting. They don't feel their bodies, they don't question their assumptions, they just perform intelligence. The third circuit loves this. It feeds on performance. But performance isn't the same as perception. Language can act like a spell or a virus, depending on how it's used. When it casts a spell, it rearranges reality, makes you fall in love, believe in gods, organize revolutions. When it acts like a virus, it replicates unchecked, hijacks cognition, creates ideological possession. Wilson treats both metaphors seriously. You can be infected by a phrase, "Make America great again," "Defund the police," "Trans women are women," "Trans women are not women." These aren't just opinions. They are semantic weapons that reprogram identity, loyalty, and emotion. Each one carries an implicit narrative, and once that narrative attaches to your third circuit, your whole perception begins bending toward it. This is not exaggeration. This is neural engineering done with hashtags. The only way out is to get funny. That's Wilson's meta strategy. Humor, paradox, contradiction, these are the tools that soften the third circuit's grip. When you can laugh at a definition, you're no longer owned by it. When you can flip meanings mid-sentence, when you can enjoy being wrong, when you can say maybe more than must, that's when language becomes play again. You start using words the way a musician uses notes, not to describe reality, but to dance with it. You regain agency. You speak in spirals instead of walls. The rigid ego starts to loosen, not dissolve, just relax. Wilson includes actual techniques to help this process. E' is one, eliminating all forms of the verb to be from your vocabulary. Instead of saying she is cruel, you say I experience her behavior as cruel. That tiny shift pulls you back into your own body, your own lens. Another method, refuse to define abstract terms for a week. Instead of saying freedom, describe what it looks like. Make the implicit explicit. Deconstruct your own statements. Play semantic tag with your friends. These aren't games, they're hacks. They unhook your nervous system from linguistic dogma. They remind you that words are just signs, and behind every sign, there's a nervous system trying to make sense of the chaos. The moment language took root in the nervous system, time was no longer something humans moved through. It became something they manipulated. Symbols let us remember, plan, record, model. Suddenly, the mind wasn't just reacting to stimuli, it was rehearsing, predicting, simulating, and with each passing generation, the number of symbols multiplied. Language made time stackable. You could download the thinking of dead men. You could inherit centuries of cause and effect through parable or formula. The brain, once bounded by the now, began to spin into acceleration, and once it started, it couldn't stop. Wilson saw history not as a straight line, but as a spiral speeding towards something, or maybe just spinning out. Each invention leads to 10 more. One printing press begets a flood of books. One steam engine births an industrial complex. With each symbolic advance, the volume of abstraction increases. More data, more definitions, more contradictory maps. Children are born into cultures more symbol-saturated than their grandparents could have imagined. They inherit not just trauma and language, but entire cognitive overloads, media feeds, ideological clashes, algorithmic preferences. The spiral tightens, and the psyche strains to keep up. Posthistoric man isn't a prophecy. It's already here. You've seen him. He speaks in hyperlinks, learns in nonlinear loops, references memes like ancient scripture. He doesn't live in chronological time. He lives in networks of information, always updating, always recoding. His identity is modular. He mutates on contact with new data. This is not transhumanism. It's neuroplasticity doing its job. Wilson's post-historic prototype is someone who no longer anchors themselves in tradition or narrative, but moves through symbolic space like a jazz musician, improvising, self-aware, meta-literate. He isn't more evolved, just differently wired, often overwhelmed, always rewiring. Television was the prototype of the modern attention weapon. The third circuit, designed to handle spoken interaction, suddenly faced a wall of flickering symbols 24/7. The result wasn't education, it was semantic flooding. Advertising hijacked association. Entertainment reshaped memory. Every screen became a ritual of reprogramming. Now extend that into the internet. The nervous system gets pinged hundreds of times a day. Each ping demands a decision. Like, ignore. Argue, forward, laugh, disgust. The third circuit starts to fragment. Processing all this doesn't make you smarter, it just makes you more exhausted. Attention is spent like currency, and very few are budgeting well. When the signals come too fast, the circuits shut down. That's when deceleration kicks in. Not everyone surfs the chaos. Many retreat back into the second circuit, into nationalism, into fundamentalism, into traditional values. These are not ideas, they're panic responses. The nervous system, flooded with ambiguity, grabs for simplicity. Build a wall, follow a prophet, return to the good old days. It doesn't matter if they existed. The myth is more stabilizing than the flood of real-time contradiction. Wilson nails this. Deceleration isn't reactionary in a political sense, it's neurological. It's a freeze response to complexity. Zoom out far enough and modern society looks like a war of speeds. On one side, symbolic accelerants, tech innovation, progressive ideology, digital culture. On the other, decelerationist trying to hold back the tide, conservatism, dogma, identity essentialism. Neither side is wrong, they're just running different clock speeds. This is the dialectic Wilson lays bare. Not just political, nervous. The liberal and the conservative aren't just disagreeing, they're living in different feedback loops, attuned to different temporal vibrations. The conflict isn't moral, it's metabolic. Too much speed doesn't enlighten, it shatters. The nervous system, unable to integrate, starts to fracture. Burnout, anxiety, compulsive novelty-seeking, radicalization, they're all symptoms of third circuit whiplash. Wilson warns that when the third circuit accelerates too fast without grounding, the first two circuits rebel. The survival brain panics. The emotional ego lashes out. You can't just plug into novelty endlessly. Without rituals, rest, and neurological integration, the system melts down. That's not collapse, it's reboot. But the reboot isn't gentle. It's fascism, religious mania, or psychotic withdrawal. That's how the dialectic collapses into tragedy. But time binding isn't a curse if you know how to steer. The brain that can accelerate can also filter, reframe, stretch time like dough. Rituals matter. Stillness matters. Metacognition becomes the new steering wheel. If the mind can watch itself bind time, watch the loop instead of being trapped in it, it can reshape the spiral into a pattern instead of a cyclone. This is where art, meditation, psychedelics, and semantic play come in. Not escapes. Tools. Rebalancing mechanisms. The surfer doesn't stop the wave. He rides it. That's what Wilson means by conscious time binding. You can't go back. The flood of information isn't slowing. The third circuit isn't devolving. It's mutating. The only way forward is to learn to surf your own symbolic loops, to flow with change without drowning in it. This is not a call to clarity. It's a call to flexibility. Mental surfing means holding contradictory maps, switching between speeds, laughing at your own definitions while still using them. The world isn't going to get simpler. But you can get more complex without becoming chaotic. It's a dance on the edge of signal, and your balance is the only freedom you'll ever really have. Puberty flips a switch that most people mistake for self-discovery. But the self it reveals is not original. It's pre-scripted, pre-approved, already waiting behind the hormonal curtain. The fourth circuit boots up with a handshake between the nervous system and the social template it was born into. Suddenly you're aware of your body in public, of glances, of status, of the weight of your name, and the roles available to you. It's not you emerging. It's a role you're being handed. And whether you accept it or reject it, you're still reacting to the same programming. The tribe trains its initiates through embarrassment, allure, praise, and silence. You become someone, but that someone is made of other people's expectations glued onto flesh. Morality doesn't descend from heavens or principles. It's enforced by crowds. Peer approval is the primitive neurochemical signal that makes tribal living possible. The fourth circuit runs not on logic, but on emotional feedback loops. A smile, a nod, a cold shoulder, a laugh at your expense. These shape behavior faster and deeper than any lecture on ethics. The tribe whispers what is acceptable. Deviate too far, and the nervous system flares with rejection signals. The result is not a decision, it's a reshaping of self-perception. Your idea of right and wrong is deeply wired into your desire to belong, not your intellectual commitments. That's why entire societies can agree slavery is just, or that virginity has value, or that some haircuts are offensive. It's not about principle, it's about pheromones and mirrors. Sexuality, far from being natural, is a swamp of cultural hallucinations. Your erotic template is not sacred, it's software. Fantasies, fetishes, desires, they're sculpted by exposure, shame, praise, trauma, story, and timing. There is no default setting. The body reacts, yes, but the mind narrates, edits, filters. Porn doesn't just titillate, it programs. Religion doesn't just repress, it brands the libido with guilt and moral context. You are not straight or kinky or vanilla by nature. You are an imprint pattern caught in a symbolic web. Wilson makes this clear. Your sexuality is a hologram, flickering between instinct and instruction, biology and myth. Until you see it, it runs you. Once you see it, you can start to play. The Fourth Circuit is where roles calcify into identities. You're not just a person now, you're a man, or a woman, or non-binary, or something that fits into a map of social expectations. You're a good girl or a rebel, a provider or a whore, a boyfriend, a husband, a muse, a threat. These roles aren't chosen, they're reinforced through every cultural signal you absorb. Even when you reject a role, you often just slip into another. The punk is still defined by the square. The celibate still orbits sex. Your personality becomes a series of reflexes calibrated to gain approval or avoid shame. What you call me is mostly performance. Conscience is less about ethics than it is about Pavlov. The Fourth Circuit is a Skinner box of emotional punishment and reward. Do what's expected and you get love. Break the code and you get exile. So your moral compass is tuned not by truth but by social weather. If your tribe rewards cruelty, you'll feel proud to be cruel. If they punish curiosity, you'll learn to self-censor before the thought even fully forms. This is why indoctrination works so well. It bypasses thought and goes straight to the nervous system. You don't need to believe. You just need to feel the fear of disapproval. That's the leash. The line between sacred and obscene isn't natural, it's drawn by the Fourth Circuit. What's holy in one culture is disgusting in another. What's romantic to you might be sacrilege elsewhere. Virginity, nudity, menstruation, intergenerational sex, gendered fashion, these taboos are not universal truths. They're tribal settings. But once imprinted, they feel like moral absolutes. That's the trick. The circuit encodes its preferences so deeply that violating them triggers disgust or outrage at a biological level. You feel dirty, not because something is dirty, but because your nervous system has been programmed to flag certain symbols as threats to your social standing. Adolescence is when the imprint usually hits hardest. That's when the Fourth Circuit opens fully and looks for a template. But instead of guidance, most teens are fed confusion, contradiction, porn, fear, pressure, and pop culture tropes. So the imprint locks on to whatever fills the void. Sometimes it's a crush, sometimes it's a role model, sometimes it's trauma. Whatever it is, it burns in deep, and it defines your erotic blueprint, your self-worth algorithm, your taste in partners, and even your sense of political virtue. The tragedy is not that the imprint happens. The tragedy is that nobody warns you it's happening, so you spend the next 30 years thinking it's who you are. The fashion industry runs on Fourth Circuit triggers. So do religions. So do armies. Uniforms, haircuts, gestures, makeup, rituals, all are designed to signal status and enforce conformity. To wear the right thing is to belong. To deviate is to be marked. Sexual attractiveness is tribal currency. Religious modesty is the same game in reverse. Pornography trains people on one spectrum. Wedding ceremonies train them on another. It's all choreography meant to keep you within acceptable semiotic borders. You don't just dress yourself, you signal yourself. And the signal says, I follow the code, please love me. Some Fourth Circuit scripts are expansive, open to experimentation, redefinition, pluralism. Others are rigid, tribal, binary, moralistic. The kind of imprint you receive shapes how you navigate the world. A flexible imprint gives rise to people who adapt. A rigid one creates people who panic at ambiguity. Wilson's brilliance is showing how these different circuit programs explain social fragmentation. Some people are processing the Fourth Circuit with 21st century tools. Others are running Bronze Age software with nuclear weapons. They're not bad, they're outdated, but outdated scripts with power can still destroy. The culture wars are not philosophical, they're neurological. What looks like debate is usually imprint conflict. When someone argues about gender, what they're really defending is their Fourth Circuit blueprint. One person's moral clarity is another's trauma response. That's why these debates never resolve, because they're not about facts, they're about nervous systems reacting to perceived social survival threats. Wilson doesn't offer easy answers. He offers a framework. Stop expecting the tribe to agree. Start noticing which parts of your brain are doing the shouting. The exit ramp is awareness. When you recognize that your role is a role, you stop being controlled by it. That doesn't mean you ditch it. It means you play it. You wear it with irony, flexibility, and choice. You become the actor instead of the character. Wilson doesn't suggest abolishing roles. He suggests transcending them. Knowing that you're performing allows you to re-script yourself in real time. The Fourth Circuit becomes a costume department, not a prison. Wilson's exercises here aren't theoretical, they're neural tricks. Wear clothes that violate your identity. Speak in dialects, play with gender, write erotica outside your comfort zone. Compliment your enemies. These aren't games, they're weapons. Every time you confuse your Fourth Circuit, you weaken the imprint. Every time you laugh at your own shame, you loosen its grip. Identity, once fluid, becomes a sandbox. You stop asking who you are, you start choosing. The idea that you are thinking your own thoughts is the first illusion that has to die. Most of what runs through your internal monologue was installed without your consent. You're not choosing your worldview. You're playing back an echo. From the moment your nervous system lit up, it's been under construction. Parents, television, religion, advertising, school, they don't argue with you. They format you. What you call me is a layered archive of borrowed syntax, fears disguised as values, and rewards disguised as love. You're a patchwork of ancestral code and institutional suggestion, glued together by memory and defended by habit. Free will doesn't begin until you recognize this. Until then, you're just running code like every other trained monkey in a suit. Conditioning is an art form. Pavlov made dogs drool on cue. Skinner made pigeons play ping pong. Goebbels turned a traumatized nation into an ideological cathedral of blind obedience. The techniques aren't magic, they're just systematic control of stimulus and response. Repetition, rhythm, emotional hooks, reward for loyalty, punishment for dissent. Wilson puts these tactics under a spotlight not to moralize, but to reveal how they've been refined and scaled up. Once you see how humans respond to fear, shame, and praise, you understand why every empire eventually becomes a propaganda engine. The masses aren't persuaded, they're conditioned, and it doesn't take a genius, it takes a checklist. Walk through a mall, attend a Sunday sermon, scroll through your phone, sit through a lecture. The Fourth Circuit and Third Circuit are both getting worked. Schools don't teach critical thinking, they enforce semantic obedience. Religion doesn't open minds. It colonizes emotional circuitry with archetypal threats and symbolic carrots. Advertising skips the intellect entirely. It goes straight to your biosurvival reflex and seduces the second circuit with status cues. Every brand is a tribal signal. Every ad is a ritual. You're not choosing a product. You're reinforcing your symbolic identity. Wilson's warning is subtle but devastating. Every institution that trains attention is programming it. Imprinting and conditioning aren't the same thing, and if you don't know the difference, you're vulnerable to both. Imprinting happens once, often during a moment of heightened vulnerability, shock, trauma, sexual tension, or deep surrender. It's permanent unless overridden by another imprint window. Conditioning, by contrast, happens through repetition. It's more flexible, but harder to detect. Your disgust reflex to certain words, your body tension in front of authority, your pleasure when praised by a stranger. These are signs of conditioning. If you're aware of them, you can start to unhook. If you're not, you will keep mistaking habit for authenticity. Wilson doesn't ask you to be perfect. He asks you to become precise. You weren't programmed by accident. You were programmed because it makes you manageable. Not because there's a cabal, but because the nervous system responds reliably to certain patterns. The modern nation-state doesn't need to read your thoughts. It already knows how to install them. The market doesn't need your loyalty. It just needs your impulse to associate dopamine with the right color palette and slogan. No shadowy villain required. Just systems evolving to exploit feedback. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Your political leanings, your sexuality, your belief in what is or isn't sacred, all influenced by what the tribe needed you to become. That isn't conspiracy, that's structure. The most valuable resource on Earth is not gold, not oil, not data, it's your attention. And it's under siege. Whoever captures your attention programs your nervous system. That's it. The headlines, the algorithm, the voice on the podcast, each one is bidding for control of your internal environment. The nervous system can't filter fast enough, so it starts reacting. Clickbait trains your outrage. Branding trains your loyalty. Fear porn trains your worldview. Once your attention is externally managed, your behavior follows. The new battlefield isn't in the streets, it's in the space between stimulus and response. Wilson's point isn't to resist everything. It's to notice what's pulling your strings before your legs start moving. If you can spot the script, you can start rewriting it. But that requires brutal honesty and surgical self-observation. Not self-blame, not affirmation, just pattern recognition. When you react, trace it. Where did that tone of voice come from? Who benefits from your outrage? Why does this story feel more real than others? These aren't spiritual questions, they're neurological diagnostics. You have been encoded by a system you didn't design. You can either stay inside it and call it truth, or you can become the glitch, the anomaly that rewrites its own code. Wilson doesn't give you a key. He hands you a flashlight and tells you to find the hinges. The door's been there the whole time. So here we are, at the edge of the first half of the labyrinth. We've followed the circuits from the suckling infant to the code-drenched postmodern primate, mapping how your nervous system got hijacked before you could spell your own name. We've peeled back the myth of autonomy, exposed the scaffolding of identity, and stood face to face with the cold, brilliant machinery of cultural conditioning. Not to judge it, not to fix it, but to see it, clearly. That's always the first step. To stop calling the cage a cathedral. And this is where we pause. Not because the journey is over, but because the terrain ahead is about to tilt again. The next phase takes us beyond the social circuits and into the strange realms of ecstasy, intuition, evolution, and reprogramming. We'll dive into circuits 5 through 8, the hidden systems, the ones most people never even activate. It gets weirder, it gets lighter, it gets dangerous in all the good ways. So if you've made it this far, stay with it. The second and final part is coming. And it's not just more information, it's the key to bending the software of your own mind towards something wilder than belief, freedom. Until then, breathe, watch your reactions, and start noticing the scripts. They're everywhere, and they're not you.